When we brought in the Freedom of Information Act, it was intended to do a number of things. First of all, to deliver up open government. I suppose one of the first things that the infant state did was to enact the Official Secrets Act. And I remember when I joined the civil service as a young 19-year-old back in 1970, the first thing I had to do was to sign the Official Secrets Act. The second thing I had to do was to guarantee to say I wouldn't park my bike inside government. So it was nearly your first introduction to the public service. Before you were told anything else was the Official Secrets Act. So we're trying to, I suppose, change the balance between the citizen and the state. That information, as you know, is power. And whoever holds all the information holds most of the cards. And if you really want to empower citizens, they need to know what's going on and how they can, I suppose, input into the process on an ongoing basis, as distinct from just once every 5 years you exercise your vote. Because I suppose we have been characterised by a reasonably lively interplay between citizens, civic society and the state, but the dice were very much on the state side when other people didn't have the information. A third thing we wanted to do was to improve governance. And I suppose the big mantra of the 1990s was openness, transparency and accountability. And people in the public service, and I'm now working back again as a public servant myself, make decisions and give advice and write papers every day of the week. And your job in the public service is to look at the different angles, to weigh them up, what are the pros and cons, on the basis of that, to give as objective a piece of advice as you can. Now, if you think that your advice will never see the light of day, or will only see the light of day 30 years later under the Official Secret, under the Archives Act, I suppose there can become in situations where a particular government may be in power for a long time, a situation where the public service stops challenging, stops looking at all angles on the situation, and starts becoming a yes man to whoever it is, the government of the day. And it is really important that if we're taking important policy decisions, like decisions that are going to affect people's lives, that they are actually carefully scrutinised and that all the angles are teased out before the elected person, the minister, makes a final decision. And I suppose we felt that in enacting freedom of information, that if you thought what you're writing today could be in the papers in 6 months' time, it's a lot, I suppose, sharper discipline on have you done your job right? Have you looked at all angles? Or you seem to be a sloppy worker with your name at the bottom of the file. So that the feeling was that freedom of information, and that idea that the public was always sitting at your shoulder and could always, that most things were disclosable, would improve the way decisions were actually taken. Better would improve accountability on policy, that again looking at why decisions were taken, that the public would be able to go back and ask the why questions, because they would see what decisions were being taken in a lot more fine-grained detail, and again to ask some of the questions, and that would improve the accountability. We've seen over recent weeks, for example, a great deal of accountability being exercised by the Dáil, as they are teasing out the information, whether it's information about the governance of the Central Media Clinic or Rehab, or whether it's information around the GSOC and so on. But as information is fed into the system, there is increasing accountability for what happens. And the final thing, and this is a bit that often gets overlooked, is the value of freedom of information in empowering citizens in their personal dealings with the state. Now, most of us have dealings with the state in all sorts of ways. You have a baby, you're collecting children's allowance, you may be in a state-funded hospital having the baby, your kids go to a state-funded school, you're a farmer, you're applying for an agricultural grant, you're a trade unionist, and you have laws on workers' rights and so on. And so people have individual dealings with the state all the time. And one of the important parts of the Freedom of Information Act was that Section 16 set out that if there was any scheme of entitlement, that the rules had to be made public, and that you couldn't be judged by something, by rules, by hidden rules that weren't there. And under Section 18, that people had the right to get reasons for decisions that were made about them, their own particular case. So if you think of somebody is turned down for an old age pension on grounds of means, so they can see, well, what are the rules about means? What is counted? Is my house counted? Is my garden counted? Are my shares in Aircom counted? What's counted? And at what value? And then to know, if you're turned down, then to see what the reasons are. And then you can see whether that's about a mistake. Maybe they got your date of birth wrong, and you have documentary evidence to prove that there was a mistake on that. Or you say, okay, well, there were the rules. I don't meet the conditions. It's a fair cop. So again, it's an important part in empowering individuals in their dealings with the state. So the scope of the Freedom of Information Act started off with government departments, and they came in a year after the date of enactment, which on the 21st of April 1998. And the idea of leaving the year was to give time to get geared up, and that freedom of information was more likely to take hold in a situation where, you know, the homework had been done and people were ready for it. Where if it was a disaster from day one because no homework had been done, then an incoming government, and there was an incoming government, could have repealed a lot more of it than they did in 2003. Then the next batch to come in 6 months later were the local authorities, the HSE, and most state agencies. Now there are a series of state agencies that are listed as being in, and then other state agencies can be added by ministerial order. And I suppose one of the disappointments over the years is that as new state agencies or institutions were created, but they weren't automatically brought in under freedom of information. And in the light of what's happening at present, there were huge battles when we were doing the legislation about bringing the guards in under control. And the compromise that was reached in order to get the legislation over the line was the guards could in principle be brought in, but it would be a matter for agreement with the Minister for Justice of the day that would be brought in. So they were there in principle, but they weren't there. It was kind of yes, but not yet. And we're still not yet until the new amendment bill comes through. Organisations that are doing business on contract with the state were brought in. So voluntary hospitals, the likes of St Michael's House, those what you call Section 38 agencies, they are in under freedom of information. And again, coming back to that empowerment of the individual. So if you're somebody who's getting a disability service from St Michael's House, your dealings with there can come in under the Freedom of Information Act, because it's basically pretty well 100% state-funded service and under that service arrangement. So work done on contract with the state. So if my current job of head of research, if I do a contract with somebody, is contract to do a piece of research, the paperwork around that research, you know, can be accessed under freedom of information with due regard to the other safeguards in the legislation. And new bodies can be added by ministerial order. Now, the new bill that Brendan Halloran is bringing through, the amendment, it actually is going to repeal the lot and reenact, so it will all be in one piece of legislation rather than you having to cross-reference back and forward. But one of the things they're changing is that the new bodies will come in automatically, and it's only by exception that the ministerial order will be to take somebody out. From a trade union perspective, you might be interested in the benchmarking body. The benchmarking body sat and made a recommendation that cost 1.3 billion in terms of increases, and the way that a lot of people felt was extremely opaque. I put in freedom of information request to the body and was told that no, it was not part of it. So then I knew that the Department of Finance would have, if they had deals with the Department of Finance, you could get it from finance. So I put in freedom of information request to finance, and I discovered that when they set up the benchmarking body, the Department of Finance said, don't give us any papers, because if you give us papers, they'll be accessible under freedom of information. So they kept it offshore and off-site. Completely against the spirit. And whatever you think about the rights or wrongs of benchmarking, there was a lot of money at stake. There were a lot of people who felt that benchmarking had not been fair as between different groups of people, and that the public had an entitlement to know what lay behind this particular decision. preparation year, big preparation year, 94, 95. And they were Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we looked at those, and in New Zealand and in Australia, and you had 7 different legislation in Australia, because one for each individual state and then the federal government. And they all wanted to have what they called a purpose clause. So when it came to interpret the legislation, you went to your purpose clause. So if in doubt, see, why was this being done? So we talked to the parliamentary draftsman who said we wanted a purpose clause, and we said, well, in the Irish system you don't get a purpose clause, but you get the long title, which does the same. So this is what the long title says: to enable members of the public to obtain access to the greatest extent possible, consistent with the public interest and the right to privacy, to information in the possession of public bodies. So when it comes to weighing the discretions in the bill, or the Act, and there are discretions in there, that this is, you know, a principle to keep in front. So to the greatest extent possible, consistent with the public interest, and obviously individuals' right to personal privacy. So the basic structure of the freedom of information legislation is, first of all, there's a legal right. Citizens have a legal right, and I say citizens, you don't have to be a non-citizen or somebody living here, or don't have to be living here, but individuals have a legal right, or companies, you know, it can be a corporate body or a trade union, the right to information held by public bodies, unless it comes to the exempt category. So the presumption is you have a right unless for some reason it will be held back. And except for security, defence, international relations, those kind of holy grail ones, exemptions are subject to a public interest test. So something may be exemptable but not necessarily exempt. And if the public interest in releasing material outweighs the public interest in applying the exemption, the material will be released. I'll give you an example of that. I had to process a freedom of information request recently for minutes of our board, the board of the National Disability Authority. And in it there was a number of names of individuals. There were individuals who were on a short list for jobs but didn't get a job because the top person got them, so they obviously had to be scrubbed out because they were private citizens. But there were also names of 3 of our board members and all the rest of that. And as you can imagine, if you're talking about what is personal information that is normally kept secret, there's nothing really more personal than your pregnancy and your sexual relationships and so on. It's very personal information. So the normal course you'd say, this is about somebody's pregnancy, so you wouldn't release those names out, so congratulations to X, Y and Z on their pregnancy. And on the other hand, these were people who were serving on the board of a public body and who didn't turn up, if you like, for their duty for a number of months because they were on maternity leave. So there was a public interest in knowing why they were AWOL, if you like, from appearing at board meetings. So I approached the 3 people concerned and said, look, on the one hand this is personal information, on the other hand there is a public interest in saying that you didn't turn up to board meetings for a number of months for very valid reasons. You were on maternity leave, so I think the public interest here would outweigh the preservation of privacy. And they all said, oh no, we've no problem with that, that's fine. So that would help. But that's a very, you might say, a trivial example of weighing up the public interest. But you have to look at, does the public interest outweigh the reason why you would exempt information? So the things that are actually exempt, government meetings, government memos. Now, you refer to the 5-year rule, which became a 10-year rule under the 2003 Act, just as the 5-year rule was about to kick in from 1998. So the 10-year rule is currently in place, and now in 2014 we can look at government memos going back to 2004. So they are coming in. Memos for government, again, the 2003 Act, it broadened the definition of government to include all sorts of subcommittees and a few civil servants and a minister sitting together, and it really broadened that. And under the umbrella cabinet confidentiality, which is, as you know, constitutionally protected, they were broadening that. Parliamentary business, so TDs have absolute privilege, so they're not, if you like, subject to the private papers of a TD. So if you go to a TD, it's like going to confession. So you can often see parliamentary questions, name and address implied. So, you know, nobody can get behind that by asking the TDs to give stuff. Equally, anything court business or anything that would undermine the administration of justice in that area, you know, to queer a trial, you can't get that. So law enforcement, again, something that would hinder law enforcement. So, for example, you know, if the guards are about to raid, you know, Fanula's has some grounds that think she has a stash of whatever there, illegally brewed hooch, there is no way Fanula can find that out in advance by looking at it. Security, defence, international relations, again, this is common to every country that has these things that would not are about security, but would harm security, or harm defence, would harm international relations. Again, I remember the example I used to give that if somebody wanted the menu for breakfast in Mountjoy, that wasn't a secret. But if you wanted the secret code to kind of open the doors, that would be a secret. And things where disclosure is prohibited in another act. And one of the really sad things was that in the period since enactment of freedom of information, the number of acts that have prohibited disclosure, the amount of things that are legally prohibited has gone up by 50% in the period since enactment of freedom of information. There was a mechanism put in the Act to review these after a 5-year period with the view that some of these would say, well, we don't need them anymore in this new open society. The Dáil and the Information Commission reviewed all this stuff and went absolutely nowhere. So we'll see whether that mechanism is being re-engaged in the new legislation. We'll see it doesn't move. The things that are exemptable, but not so necessarily exempt, is, for example, the deliberations, which just means when somebody is, you're just discussing a policy. It doesn't mean that, you know, the public is sitting under the table while we're debating, you know, all the different angles on something. Let's say universal health insurance. So that people are free to think the wild and wacky without somebody saying, oh, shock horror, they're thinking of this. Because unless you tease out all the angles, you won't get a good policy. So I think people need to be free not to be just thinking in a very safe box, but actually to be pushing out the boat a bit. So while the deliberative process, the policy making process is underway, the material around that can be exempted. Doesn't have to be if the public interest in disclosure is greater, the public interest in, if you like, allowing the free flow of discussion. But once the decision has been made, then the deliberative process is stopped and it's over. It was interesting, I was looking at some materials that were being exempted under the grounds that they were deliberations of government, and some of those certificates go back 6 years. And so it'll still be ongoing. I mean, there may be things that are always ongoing, like the North. But some of these other things, you know, would you not just make a decision and be done with it? And to what extent can you claim that something is still under active deliberation? You mean, functions and negotiations. From a trade union perspective, this does not mean that you're going in to negotiate with government about pay, that, you know, the other side's negotiation stance is an open book. You know, equally in terms of things that would jeopardise the performance of functions of audits and so on. So if you're doing spot checks, you know, the days on which you do the spot checks aren't going to be, you know, up on the internet, so everybody knows when you're going to do spot checks. Or, you know, you're not going to release the questions that are going to be on the Leaving Cert exam. They won't be available the previous Easter under freedom of information. So that's all just very common sense kind of stuff. Information given in confidence on the understanding that it would be confidential. So we have had this, for example, the confidential recipient who's now gone. So if somebody gave information in confidence on the assumption that it would be kept confidential, and this can often arise where somebody's making a complaint in confidence that they think their neighbour may be sexually abusing somebody or whatever. They don't want to be fingered as the person who made the complaint. They give it in confidence. It is in the public interest that those kind of things will continue to come in. There is a provision in the Act that if somebody is what they call vexatious, if they're, you know, doing this, you know, scattering allegations like confetti, well, that can be caught. But if it is about, you know, somebody genuinely, there's something funny going on now, or maybe going on may be harmless, but they think it's something that ought to be investigated. Well, those things, it is in the public interest, they will be in confidence. Another thing that arises often is that where you have, let's say, somebody going for a job and there is a confidential, somebody looks for a confidential reference, so they don't have the reference that you would actually hand to somebody which says, no, Eithne is absolutely wonderful, please take her off our hands because you know those kind of references that some of us get. The too glowing, you say, what's the catch here? But one that says, look, great at this, but actually, really blows it a gasket when X, Y, Z happens. But if you can live with that, she's great, So those more real things, again, if people want to keep them coming, and if it's considered to be in the public interest. So that's an arguable one on either side, is the public interest in you knowing what's been said about you, does that outweigh the public interest that we would have a system where there would be some sort of, if you like, real checks before somebody is offered a job. So that's a balanced one where somebody has to weigh up the balance on both things. Commercially sensitive information. And again, so if I'm putting in a bid for something and I'm giving my prices, that then they're not, those prices haven't been given to competitors. If I haven't got the bid, then you've public money at stake, so it's over then. The confidence applied to during the bidding process and the people who didn't win the thing. Personal information about individuals, and that is about people's personal lives and the stuff that, the way the Act describes it, is that it's something that will be known, generally speaking, only to family and friends. It's personal. So your mobile phone number would be personal information, unless it's a work mobile, in which case it wouldn't be. A work mobile in the public service. So if you're working in a public role, then anything to do with your public duties, what you're being paid to do, if you like, by the public, is not personal information. So we ask then, is Angela Curran's salary personal information, or is it public information? And to the extent that she's receiving public money, that is public information. So what is personal information? And then research and natural resources. So again, it's not about somebody else gazumping you to the Nobel Prize because they steal research before it's done. Or, if you're the person who has done the prospecting and you're discovering oil, or you're discovering things, you're the person who made the investment. So some kind of protection around that. And also protection around environmental stuff, that if this is the only secret layer of the Natterjack toad and you're afraid that vandals will come and destroy it and the Natterjack toad will be wiped out for posterity, then you can keep it secret. Those kind of things. And the financial and economic interests of the state, which is something we all know lots about now. And there have been some interesting cases. A lot of freedom of information requests have come in the wake of the financial collapse and the Troika and so on. And some of them have said, well, actually, publishing this would not help us when we're going to try and raise money in the bond markets the next time. So we don't, the Irish public may get the nuances, but we don't think Bloomberg TV or others will get the nuances. And actually, we think that there could be a big price to be paid by the public. It might cost us 500 million extra to borrow this if we set out this piece. So those have been kind of the deliberations that have been around that. So the statistics, there have been nearly 200,000 requests since 1998. 3/4 of them were ordinary people looking for personal information about themselves. 1 in 10 were from journalists, and this is the bit you see, the bit that appears in the paper. And in terms of refused 10%, part granted 20%. Now part granted could be as trivial as where I blanked out on this request I got, literally a handful of individuals' names where it wasn't appropriate that those personal names come into the public domain. People who'd been run out for a job and were never called because the first person took it, so nobody else's business. So you could say I part granted those, but they were, so the extent to which you are genuinely part granted or, pretty well granted for minor things, we don't know in terms of the stats, but refused only 10% and part granted 20%. 4% are appealed internally, because if you want to appeal a refusal, the first thing you've got to go to somebody who's basically higher up in the organisation who take a fresh look at it. And lots of things get resolved at that point. It could be maybe a more junior officer made a mistake, or somebody else takes a different view about the balance between the public interest and the state. Or in some kind of negotiation with the requester, well, what are you really looking for? Do you want all this stuff here, which is like a needle in a haystack, or is this really what you're asking for? We talked to the Australians and they said some guy put in a request for everything about every road work. You know, that would have been a truck full, the size of this room, all the files and all these repairs. And really what he wanted to know is why haven't they fixed the pothole on his road? And that was a much easier question to ask than going the other things. So again, discussion. There is something in the Act which says that the official who's dealing with the request has a duty to assist the requester to kind of try and, you know, narrow what they're looking for and find what they're looking for. And that helps both sides, because you're not on the public service side digging out reams of information that nobody actually wants. And on the other side, you're not frustrating somebody giving this haystack and all he wants is to find the needle. Of course, you get requests where there are journalists who are going on a fishing expedition and they're seeing, and sometimes what they get, there's no story in it, it may be interesting or they feel it's not sexy from a journalistic point of view. Fees regime was changed in 2003 as part of the Charlie McCreevy changes, watering down of the Act. The upfront fee is €15 for non-personal information, and it applies to per request. Now, I have seen some really amazing requests which have asked for, I wrote them down somewhere, I haven't got them in front of me here, but they were asking for, you know, in the one request, let's say, what is the menu for breakfast in Mountjoy? What were the criteria for the appointment of the Garda Commissioner? And, you know, what is the budget being spent on publicity on violence against women? So, you know, three completely different sort of things. And I said, what I've given you now is much more coherent sounding than some of these. So there is a suggestion that the fee would be lowered and that, but that, you know, if things were clearly very separate, that they would be considered to be separate requests rather than an omnibus request, which is saying, can I have the kitchen sink and will you re-plumb my attic and will you, you know, drain the channel, all in one request, so that they would be treated as separate things. Search and retrieval, €20 an hour. And does it cost that much to you know, some things is, can people find this? I took the view when I was dealing with freedom of information requests that we discovered holes in our own filing system and where stuff was, so I don't think anybody should be charged for our inefficiency. It taught us things we needed to tidy up about our own operation. One of the things that they were looking for, there was a woman who's been out sick, and she's unfortunately got leukemia, and you know where her files were, she would have been able to find it there, but it took the rest of us quite a bit of time to find her stuff. So no, I don't think any requester should be charged for that. The internal appeal is £75 and the appeal to the Information Commission €150. Now, you don't get in any other jurisdiction if they have charges. They don't have charges, if you like, at both ends. You either give it free and you charge for appeal, or you charge at the beginning and there's no charge for an appeal, and the scale of the charges here will be very much on the high side. There is a provision in the Act that says basically you shouldn't be charged a fee if it costs more to administer it. And we look at this, the number of requests after they brought in fees dropped down from 18,000 to 12,500 immediately. 2003 to 2004 just dropped like a stone by 50%. Now it has since risen back up, it's about 16,500 in 2012. 2011 we don't have complete figures for 2012, but those figures are for 2013. The last year we had the figures for the fee income from all levels, from the upfront fee, the search and retrieve, the internal appeal, and the Appeals Information Commission, total of 87,000. So you've got to say, was the administration of this, did it cost that much to administer? So is it against that test? As I said, it is controversial about whether you should have fees at all. And the only argument I would see, there's one argument that says, look, this is freedom of information, it should be free, the public has already paid, if you like, to create the information and to gather it. Now, at a time when the public service has lost a lot of staff and people are, that's a great phrase, we're doing more with less. People are being paid less and working hard and working longer hours and all the rest of that. Being tied up to tying up resources, looking for stuff that somebody actually doesn't want is a bit silly. So whether you want to give a slight pause with a nominal fee that says, look, you know, do you really want to, are you prepared to put a fiver on the table for it? I don't have a problem with a fiver. I do have a problem with something that's actually a genuine deterrent. It's more to give people pause. You know, I said I wouldn't be 100% saying there should be no fee at all, you know, let's be totally pure. I wouldn't be saying, no, we really need to charge people because this is costing public money. But I don't have personally an enormous problem, I said, with a token fee if it just gives people a bit of pause to say, do we really want this stuff? And if they do want it, that's fine, they're entitled to it. So some key freedom of information requests have come through. There's tax strategy group papers, so they have now been published more or less in national routine. Before the budget, going back to the mid-90s, a group called the Tax Strategy Group, which is consisted of senior civil servants in finance, now public expenditure, social welfare, and you know, some key advisors have sat down, they've gone through, there've been a series of short papers looking at, you know, where should we pitch, you know, the PRSI, or what are the arguments for and against tax relief on childcare versus a childcare grant versus a free preschool year. They tease out those things, and those papers are very illuminating because they actually do show a genuine effort to look at the pros and cons of things and to see them in advance. Now, not all the stuff that ends up in the finance bill has come by way of the tax strategy group, and I think, again, one of the interesting things that has come through freedom of information requests has been, for example, this group that involves the IFSC that meets under the chairmanship of the Secretary General of the Department of Finance, and where, you know, their asks for the forthcoming budget or finance bill are channeled in that way. I prefer to see things that will come through a process where they're properly weighed rather than that kind of process. A lot of stuff people asking about the economic crash and the Troika. The Bertie Bowl is probably one area where freedom of information paid for itself many times over because that had a 400 million price tag. And as more and more came out about it under freedom of information, that even in the days of the Celtic Tiger, it was clear it was an absolutely unsustainable project. And more stuff came out then around how the company that was running the swimming pool was a shell company with a fiver on the table and so on. So that was an important one. Nursing home inspection reports. Again, there was an issue that the inspectors were going in and Snowhickwa, and there was a number of appeals made by nursing home proprietors saying no, it was commercially sensitive information, and they were blown out of the water basically and said, look, this is about vulnerable people and about families of vulnerable people who really need to know what's going on in this nursing home and what is the standard of care like, and if it's not good enough for Mammy who's got Alzheimer's, they want to take Mammy and bring her somewhere where she is getting a decent standard of care. So this is a real example of, I suppose, that citizen empowerment piece of that, you know, the dealings of the citizen with the state and the state funding thing. The Lewis Underground versus Overground, that was really interesting because it was Mary O'Rourke commissioned a group to have a look at this, and it was really pretty shallow analysis on why. So we're now years later, and we at least one of the advantages of it is we're getting a bridge named after a woman trade unionist, the Rosie Hackett Bridge, as a result of this Lewis project. But you know, again, the arguments for not dealing with it at the time were poor. You see the representation behind key tax relief. So a lot of journalists have gone out and looked and said, okay, who lobbied for this? Can we see all the paperwork behind it? One of the funnier ones was released under freedom of information was where Ivor Cowley had lobbied on, I think, all three sides of something that was going to happen. he lobbied on behalf of the residents, you know, against building a women's shelter wherever, and a women's refuge, and he lobbied on behalf of Women's Aid for building. And when confronted with this, he just said, I'm just representing my constituents. One of the things that came out again under freedom of information was somebody asked about inspections, and it turned out that 3% of teachers were being inspected every year. And if you think that somebody maybe 40 years as a teacher, but the chances now, June is laughing here.
3% is enough.
but that somebody might be maybe receive an inspection on average maybe once in their career, and if you have a teacher who is great, that's no problem, but if you have a teacher who's underperforming or a system that is not performing, then a lot of kids can go through if that isn't there. Now there are other systems now in place around inspections and homeschool inspections and so on. The deal the religious orders did on institutional abuse, again, the fine print on that, on the correspondence, and in some cases the lack of papers on that came out under freedom of information. I think one of the really, I suppose, shocking things about the whole economic crash and the Troika and the Anglo-Irish Bank and all of that, the bank guarantee and the bailout, I suppose when by the time the bailout came, people were writing position papers on this stuff, but how actually little was committed to paper beforehand. And if you look at something again, which was, I think, an enormously destructive policy, the Charlie McCreevy decentralisation, again, there were absolutely no papers on that. And there was no weighing up of the pluses and minuses. It appeared to be something really cynical about let's maximise spread of these because there's elections coming up. But went back and did an analysis and realised that actually Fianna Fáil lost votes in the destination towns. And I know my sister was one of the people, and my husband at the time was, he's taught philosophy here at the People's College, but he also taught philosophy in Trinity. And my sister was due to be sent to Castleblaney. There's not much hall for political philosophy teaching in Castleblaney. So, I mean, the idea that, you know, you were sent one place and your partner or your kids or whatever would be another place, it was madness. And to this day, you know, there's meetings being held all over the place. People talk about joined up government. The whole idea of capital cities, you have it all together. And I suppose one of the things that happened, which was really undid some of certainly my vision for freedom of information, was that there remained areas where people felt, don't let's write it down because it would be under freedom of information. Now, whatever about a minister saying that, I think from the point of view of the civil servant, that was really bad, because the job of the civil service is to write down the pros and cons without fear or favour, and to do it for successive governments, and to be seen to do that in an impartial